Do you really want some of your best engineers to spend their time figuring out this networking orchestration layer to build these auto scaling sandboxes for your team? I'm sure that people there could do it, but why wouldn't you deploy them on the most important thing for your business that's going to give you huge ROI instead,
Mhm.
right?
Hey, and welcome to this episode of Build versus Buy, a 30-minute conversation with product and engineering leaders about situations during their career where they've had to decide whether to build or buy. If you'd like to be a guest, reach out to me at manggit@useanvil.com. That's MANGGIT@useanvil.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating/review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Build vs. Buy podcast. I'm your host, Manggit Ng, founder and CEO of Anvil, the fastest way to build software for documents. And today, as my guest, I have Sumeet Vaidya. He is the founder and CEO of Crafting and has spent his entire career working at various technology companies throughout Silicon Valley. We're also college buddies, so we've known each other for quite a bit of time. Sumeet was always in the advanced classes, and he was probably TAing me. Welcome to the show, Sumeet.
Thanks for having me, Maggot. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, and as always, we'd love to first get to know the guest, maybe talk a little bit about your background, and share a little bit about crafting.
Yeah, from a background standpoint, as Mangot mentioned, went to Michigan for undergrad and grad school, and then came out to Silicon Valley to work in tech. Started off my career working at Facebook in the early days. I was on the privacy team, public content, and groups, and got to work on a bunch of stuff like shipping the first real React Native app and a lot of other cool stuff that we did there. Ended up going to Uber, where I was a manager for various teams on international growth, vehicle solutions, micromobility, so all the bike, scooters, and mopeds that we were working with. And then left Uber to go join Discord about 5 years ago. Over there, I ran teams on communities, creators, developer platform, some of the AI product stuff that we had done, as well as our gaming integrations that we recently announced. And last year, I joined my co-founder to work on Crafting, where we build the only truly enterprise-ready cloud dev environments. I had seen great sandboxes in dev environments, places like Facebook. I had seen challenges getting things up and running in other companies. And we felt that there weren't really any cloud dev environments that actually solved enterprise problems. So I think there's a lot of options that are out there that are great for individual engineers, but when it comes to engineers testing in prod because it's too hard to get working with staging or get things up and running locally, or having engineers collaborate with data scientists, PMs, and other stakeholders, we believe that things could be better. So that's what we're working on in Crafting today.
Awesome. Well, actually, maybe for some of the technical folks or maybe the non-engineers, can you talk a little bit more about what a cloud dev environment is and like why you would want one?
For sure. So 20, 30 years ago, if you were working on a project, typically you'd be working on a local application, right? So engineers would write their code on their laptop, start running it, test it out, and you've got your application running. It's like, cool, let's see what does and doesn't work. As the industry evolved, you started getting more complex architectures. So when you look at Facebook, when you look at Netflix or a lot of other platforms that are out there, you might have 10, 20, 30, or 100 different services all talking to each other. You can try and get that running on your laptop, but it might just melt. Or even if you're able to have a powerful enough laptop, you run into a bunch of configuration issues. Why is this billing platform service preventing me from testing out this login button in the front end service? So there's been this shift to using larger, more powerful machines in the cloud where engineers will actually develop, run, and test their code. The challenge is that you're still running 20, 30, 100 different services. So what we try to do is we've got some fancy networking where run just the service you care about, develop against a centralized staging tier, save a bunch on costs while making it easier for engineers to actually get things up and running, but also test against production-like data instead of the issue where, well, it's too hard to get things up and running. I ship my code, I'll put it behind a feature flag and test it in production, which is horrifying and hurts my soul every time I heard an engineer say that. But at the same time, I couldn't push back because it was just really hard to get things done. So that's the current state of the world today.
It's funny that like the software development, if you go further back than 20, 30 years, like it was very much like a client server model where you would log into this massive machine to do your development work. And we've come full circle here where you would kind of log into this machine and do your development work. I think the other thing that maybe for the engineers listening here, and recently myself, I experienced this as well, which is just getting your development environment set up when you join a new company, when something changes, when somebody does a migration, when something stops building is such a pain in the ass. And like, you just don't want to spend the time doing that. And so it feels like crafting can actually just solve this problem for developers. So it's almost like a managed IT service in the cloud that somebody who might be like a DevOps person, no, not a DevOps person, like developer experience person can be managing for the entire development team. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say we actually have a pretty white glove solution. We focus on large organizations. So we work pretty closely with DevOps and developer platform and developer experience teams directly to help custom solutions. Because once you've got 200, 500, 1,000, 10,000 engineers, your tech stack is going to be fairly unique.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's something to be said about solving the really hard, gnarly technical problems that other people don't want to spend time doing. Because the reality is, if you're building a community platform for the biggest creators in the world, you probably don't want to have a bunch of engineers dedicated to developing your networking stack, digging through Kubernetes, figuring out how to deal with all these deploys internally, and rather just focus on building services that are effective and efficient for the products you're shipping. And so I think, yeah, there's something to be said about just taking the common complexities that everybody has to deal with off of the team's plate so companies can stay lean and efficient and just focus on the problems that are unique to their business.
Hey, did you know we're actually talking about building versus buying today? I don't know. It feels like this is a
Shocking. I
perfect
had no
segue
idea.
into that. I know, right? I think it's just I feel like every startup founder has experienced this where they're like, I'm going to build an application. They start off with building on something like Heroku because it's a button, deploy, whatever. It's like easy. You don't have to worry about DevOps or hire an SRE to do this. But at a certain point, your product, if you're successful or even somewhat mildly successful, or just trying to move it into the cloud, like it just becomes overwhelming to like log into. For us, we use GCP. There's a lot of configuration that happens there. And then Terraform outside of GCP to then like configure everything else. It's just, my mind is just exploding every time I go in there. I don't know what I'm doing. And it's a bunch
We
of
can
like
help with that.
configuration files.
No, I know. It's really painful. And I think one challenge that I've seen is a lot of founders will wait until it's almost too late to start getting an off-the-shelf solution that works and solves a lot of their problems, or even something that requires minimal customization. And I think there's this challenge for a lot of folks where they say, well, it's not broken yet, so I don't need to go elsewhere. Our internal thing is good enough. But I've actually pushed back, and we've had a lot of customers who've been pretty successful and happy where, just going back to crafting for a second, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people say, oh, we'll need this when we're at like 40, 50, 100 engineers for sure. But right now we've only got 20. We don't need this yet. And I just tell them, integrating today is going to be easy for you. And it will save you the headache that you have in 6 months when your team doubles, right? And I think there's this hesitance around spending a little bit more now to gain efficiency later, because when we think about having an efficient team, it's usually around cutting costs. So don't spend unless you need to. But I actually like to flip it the other way around of how do you get the most out of your team, right? If I can pay for a tool today that will give me like 80% gains on what my team can do over the next year, sure, I'd pay that upfront cost super quickly if it wasn't as much as like an incremental headcount, right? And so I think walking that line is something that's a challenge for founders, because you don't want to build a SaaS beast, for instance, right? And just throw money at the problem. But at the same time, you don't want to wait until it's too late, because then you're going to spend 6 months cleaning up all this tech debt and trying to get back to the velocity that you used to be at.
Yeah. Is there a future for crafting? I don't know. I'm making up stuff here now, right?
Yeah.
Like, is there a future for crafting where I could like start a company, go to crafting's website and just like one click deploy some like standard out of the box configuration where, you know, it's okay, this is the image or whatever I'm using. And this is like the whole stack. Just check some boxes to say, I need this and this. And it just like deploys for me. Is there a future like that? Do you think?
I think there is a future like that. I think right now it's just not our focus, because I think there are cloud dev environments that are out there today that help individual developers get up and running. The problem is once you start getting to scale, it's a fundamentally different problem. It's collaboration between engineers. It's effective cloud savings cost. It's how do you have a new type of staging tier that's not just auto deploy, that's going to be automatically rolled out to production in the future. And so our focus is more on those white glove enterprise experiences. But yeah, within the next 5 years or so, I imagine there would be a great solution for having a one-click solution with crafting, getting things up and running, even potentially locally. And then when you're ready to upgrade to the more enterprise complex experience, have a seamless transition to that. But I think the self-serve approach is candidly less complicated. And I think we want to get the enterprise approach right and then have a smooth graduation process in the
Mm.
future.
So in a lot of ways, the problem you're solving for is less so the developer experience and the developer kind of setup. It's really the engineering operations, like managing the engineering team and multiple developers
Yeah.
and the deployment process, the testing process, and all that across the application. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we do care about developer experience, but I think with a lot of developer experience tools, you want to just be as invisible as possible.
Mm-hmm.
If the engineers don't think about you at all, then you've done your job because you're removing things from their headspace,
Mm-hmm.
right? The real problems are, though, if you look at a company with 1,000 engineers or more, costs just balloon up really quickly. Provisioning a new, full, isolated cloud environment for every single engineer that has all the services running is going to be really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're able to intelligently allocate resources based on where people need them, flex things in, make it easier for builds, like we saved Verkada 80% of their internal cloud hosting costs.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that I think is very meaningful. But if you're a 1, 2, even 10-person startup, that doesn't make that much of a difference, right? So our focus is more on companies at scale. But I do think there's something to be said about once you've really crystallized that approach and have something that's just bulletproof and can help everybody save a ton of money while being more efficient, then it becomes easier to say, okay, what does a slimmed down version of this look like that makes it easy to graduate into it? As opposed to going the other way around saying, hey, we made something that's really slick and great for individual developers.
Mm-hmm.
How do we then scale this out to a complex organization? I think that's an anti-pattern.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of
Which,
sense.
going back to what we were talking about earlier too, also plays back in that folly a lot of founders make, where it's like, hey, I can build something internally today that works for us.
Right.
I'm sure I can figure out how to scale it out if we end up getting to 100 million ARR. Surprise, no, they actually can't. It becomes pretty painful for them.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of times the decision being made is the jury rig solution today is okay, let's call it 5 minutes of my time
Yeah.
and X dollars of cost. The solution that I know I want in the long term might be 10 minutes of my time, Y dollars of cost. But like the question is like, where does that balance tip where you know
Yeah.
you're going to be in this later tier at some point in time? How do you decide that you want to start there so you can avoid that transitional cost that never seems to get accounted for, right?
Yeah. The annoying answer everybody always gets is always, it depends, right? But I think there's two scenarios here. One is where you can clearly see that there's going to be a tipping point,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like talking about some of our existing customers and some people that we're talking about pilots right now, like the folks who have 20 engineers, right? They know that in 6 months, this is going to be really painful and it's already starting to get painful for them.
Yeah.
So it's a question of, do you want to force it for the next 6 months or should we just get ahead of it right now? And I think part of the thing that comes into play for us as well is how easy can we make it for them? We have 1 week onboarding to get our base version of crafting up and running for folks.
Mm-hmm.
And it requires maybe 4 hours of one of their engineers' time. So the calculation becomes much simpler. But drawing on a separate example from back when I was at Uber, right? Like we used HipChat internally for chat. It was not getting the job done for us. It was not reliable. And we were at this point where we needed to have a different provider. And the exec team made the decision between Slack and building our own internal version built on top of Mattermost called UChat. And the decision was to go with UChat because Slack was expensive, right? When you have as many employees as we did at Uber, $10, $20, $30 a month for a tool it adds up pretty quickly,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we were global, we had employees in all these different markets.
Do they not have enterprise deals at that point? Presumably you're not paying the full retail rack rate for 10,000 employees or whatever it was, right?
I would have hoped not. I was not privy to those conversations. Yeah. But going back to what I was saying earlier, like it's hard to say it would take us X amount of time. This is Y cost. Here's how we would assess it. It's just, here's what the sticker price might look like. That just seems like a lot. And I think it's hard for leaders at scale to make that decision. And it's okay, let's just try and save some money. But the thing that we didn't really take into account, or maybe we did, but my teams and I weren't expecting was it made it hard for us to do our jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I was managing teams in India. We were collaborating with people in Eastern Europe. We had folks who were up in Seattle and Vancouver while my team was mainly based in SF. And trying to coordinate with people when chat was not reliable was just a complete mess. Especially if you're out and about, like we would go travel to see centers of excellence in various cities and try to help out with driver onboarding.
Mm-hmm.
We're on mobile at that point. We're not at a laptop with a steady connection. Connection issues increase, becomes more painful. So if I'm not at my desk, I don't know if I'm reachable. And when you're talking about a distributed company that's very much in person with all of our drivers and riders and everything, it becomes very challenging. And so in that instance, it's not even a question of how much would it cost for us to do it ourselves versus how much it would cost to pay Slack.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually think of it as, do we have the expertise to build this? I think it's one thing to say, we're going to build an internal dashboard for data scientists just to look at this thing and say, well, there's other alternatives you could use, but sure, whatever, spin that. It's another to say, we are going to build an internal messaging solution for tens of thousands of engineers at scale. That's a true product. Like, that's what WhatsApp does, Facebook Messenger, iMessage, and everybody else. Like, you're trying to reinvent what they did. And if you don't have the expertise, it's hard.
Beyond the expertise, though, like, why it seems funny that you would dedicate so many resources, so much resources to
Absolutely.
just like building this thing that you weren't actually planning on monetizing down the
Absolutely.
road. Like, it's not like Uber is known as the communications app,
Sure.
the logistics app, right? So
Yeah.
I guess that's a curious decision-making process, and maybe we don't really know what was the decision behind how
Well,
the thinking was, but yeah.
we've seen this happen in other places, right? I think there is something to be said for some companies where they want to be known as the place where the best engineers can go to solve hard problems. We saw this with Facebook and Google back in the day. They did
Mhm.
everything in-house. And granted, there weren't as many SaaS options that were available for things they were building, but there was a sense of pride of, we will solve these things ourselves. And I think there were a lot of other companies that tried to take similar approaches, right? I know a lot of folks at Dropbox early on liked building things that were really hard to do, but they took pride in it, right? I know a lot of folks at some of the AI companies are saying, we're going to build it as a way to attract talent.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, unless you're flush with cash and you're willing to put a team of 5, 10, 15 engineers on this thing in perpetuity and have it be a loss leader, I have to question, why wouldn't you pay for something that works off the shelf to unlock more productivity out of your team? Because it's a question of, is your business in a steady state and you're just trying to cut costs, or are you trying to grow? If you're trying to grow, if you're trying to invest in your business, if you're just trying to be a better business overall, it's more worthwhile to figure out how to accelerate what your team can do, as opposed to take on additional pain points to save a little bit of money.
Yeah, no, totally. That's a great point. You want to help your team do what they do best, faster, better, cheaper, not
Yeah,
saddle them with extra work that
absolutely.
actually doesn't actually drive their performance. So tell me a little bit more about your experience using this homegrown application, right? It feels like there wasn't a lot of consideration amongst the, let's call it, rank and file employees that had to use this product. They were just told this is what they're going to be using. What was that experience like as a rank and file employee using this?
It was pretty challenging. I want to give the team that built it credit, because they
Mhm.
built an application that handled messaging for a company of that size. But there are pain points around, how do I update my version of the app? Because this isn't something available in the App Store,
Mhm.
since it's not a real app. There were challenges between the Apple experience versus the Android experience when you've got engineers who are all over the place in terms of phones they have, but then also operations teams with feature phones that are on Android. Reliability was a challenge. Outages were a challenge. It was just really painful and tough, to the point where we were all in person at that point,
Mhm.
right? This was pre-pandemic. My team would give up trying to use that chat application to try and talk to each other. We would just go to each other and see each other in person, because we weren't sure if there was an outage going on, if there was some reliability. And the worst part of all this too is, I'm sure the team did a lot to improve reliability, but once you go through that phase where you don't think you can rely on it for critical business needs, your team's just not going to buy back into it. And so for all we knew, it could have actually had great uptime after a certain point. But after an initial rough launch, a lot of engineers on my team just refused to use to communicate. They would just come to my desk. Especially now, remote first, right? It'd be impossible.
It's maybe that was a feature, not a bug. It encouraged collaboration amongst your team and camaraderie.
I think at that point, everyone was trying to cut down on meetings and collaboration and just get shit done. But yeah, you could probably use that as a feature today.
Yeah. I think one point, though, you just made, which is interesting, is that the level of trust in the system deteriorates so quickly that even if the system does improve and gets better, people might just not use it anymore. And this against the philosophy of move fast and break things, because like what you're saying is, because the people had this like broken experience, they're just like, well, I'm not going to use this. I'm going to move on to something else or figure out a workaround, right?
Well, I want to push back on move fast and break things, right? Move fast and break things became a meme because that's what we say at Facebook back in the day. But Facebook was a consumer product and we were trying to compete with a whole bunch of others, and we were trying to ship new things that people would stay engaged with what we had built.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about building versus buying for an internal tool, that's enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
No enterprise company, at least to my knowledge, has been successful because they adopt the move fast and break things approach, right?
Yeah.
Every single enterprise product, you have to be intentional. You actually slow down rollouts to make sure things are great. You want zero surprises, a lot of external communication to make sure people know what to expect. And so it's tough, right? Because that loss of trust wasn't unique to something we built in house. If we are trying out some external vendor and they don't have their shit together and it's not working, or if we're deploying crafting for a new customer
Mm-hmm.
and in the first few weeks of the pilot, things aren't working out, they're just going to rip it out. They're
Right.
going to be like, we don't have time for this. There are other things we can do here that are better use for our money and time. And so it's impossible to get that trust back. And if you build something in-house, there might be a little bit more grace given to the fact that it's an internal team. So you want to be nice to your coworkers, but there's still the same level of skepticism of just, well, is this actually going to be better for me?
So the context matters a lot in this scenario or in all these scenarios, right? So what is the purpose of this product that you're building and who's using it? And for business critical purposes, business critical applications, you really just don't have the level of grace, I guess, maybe
Yeah,
from your customers, from your consumers that are using the product. Yeah.
absolutely.
So with that, like, how do you think that lesson has translated into crafting? Where you kind of alluded to it a little bit, right? Today, you're working on an enterprise application that is for getting any product out the door for those teams that use you. What are some of the lessons that you apply to building crafting?
Yeah, I think there's a few of them, right? One, going back to that sense of trust, is that we need to put in work to earn trust from day one. And we need to maintain that trust by continuously investing in whatever our customers need to make sure that they view us as an explicit value add.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are any reliability issues, if there's any slowdowns, if there's any delays in terms of how quickly we respond to issues when they come up, I take that personally. I'm just like, we need to solve this right now because this is not okay. We need to have that sterling reputation. Otherwise, people aren't going to renew their contracts, but also it's going to be harder for us to actually build our business effectively, right? Trust is everything when it comes to enterprise products.
Mm-hmm.
Another factor here is just open communication about what we're doing and being intentional about how quickly we want to move. I know it's all the rage these days of people are working nights and weekends on the AI side of things and things are moving so quickly. But to me, it feels more like consumer product, but it's also race, even on the enterprise side with agents and everything, where
Yeah.
first to market is going to be so key. Whereas for us, I don't think whether or not we ship a feature on Friday versus next Monday is going to make a fundamental difference for quality of life for engineers at companies like Brex, Fair, Verkada, Instabase that we're working with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what will make a difference is if every single release we have is high quality. And they can go through the list of all the features that we've updated, all the things that we've improved, and they say, that's fantastic. And then if you start thinking about the value prop for these companies, right? Companies who say internally, we could build this out. Why should we actually pay for crafting? We go to them and say, hey, this is all the stuff we support. You could do it. But how much time and effort and overhead is it going to take to meet this same bar of excellence that we have, this same level of reliability? I think helping people understand what's a good use of their time is
Mm-hmm.
really important, right? Let's be real. We have a lot of people at Brex who are using us on a daily basis, right? Among their companies. I'm just using Brex because their expertise is in building great financial systems, right? That companies can rely on. Do you really want some of your best engineers to spend their time figuring out this networking orchestration layer to build these auto-scaling sandboxes for your team? I'm sure that people there could do it, but why wouldn't you deploy them on the most important thing for your business that's going to give you huge ROI instead,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
I'm pushing back on that a little bit, though. This is something I've experienced when I sell Anvil as a product to specifically developers, because you're selling to development teams, right?
Mhm.
Your buyer's probably a more senior, like executive on
Mhm.
the engineering side. But at the end of the day, I think one thing I get questions about a lot is like about control. Seems like one of the areas where a developer is going to be like, I want control over every single thing. I want every single knob I want to do. They might never do it. And the reality is 99% of the time they don't touch
Mhm.
anything. But is, especially for sometimes the most talented engineers, the ones that are genuinely curious and really good at their job, they almost over index on that control aspect of it. So
It's true.
how do you overcome that? Or maybe have you overcome that?
Yeah, I don't think anybody will always be able to overcome that. There will always be some people who are just committed to wanting to build something internally, and it's going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for us, the control issue hasn't been a major problem just
Mm-hmm.
because we deploy in our customers' clouds. We create dashboards that they actually use. We work very closely with their developer productivity teams and developer experience teams to see here are your workloads, here are your templates, here are your snapshots for your databases you can use. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like every enterprise organization is somewhat custom. So with our white glove service, we're working with them as opposed to just saying, hey, here's how it works, deal with it. I think it's important to be strongly opinionated about what could be best for your customer while still being flexible enough where they come to you saying, we need to do things this way. It's like, cool, we can help make that happen. Here's the work that needs to be done to make it. Right.
Mm.
But I think it's a very fair call out where if what you're selling is something that is not configurable and opaque to internal teams, there are more concerns, right? Because they don't know what's going on if something goes down, if there's an outage, if there's problems. With us, it's, hey, this workload isn't working in these sandboxes for these reasons. Cool. Let's dig into your Kubernetes cluster and actually see what's going on. Is it provider issue or something else? And so in that instance, we're debugging with them to figure out their systems as opposed to them asking, hey, what's going on with your SaaS offering?
You, just for my own personal understanding, you
Yeah.
said you deploy in their clouds. Is crafting a SaaS offering that like you then, I guess, like where does your system live? Does it live in your cloud, or do you have your own cloud that then, somehow hooks up into their cloud? Yeah, just out of curiosity.
We've had both historically, but I think the ideal approach is actually just deploying in our customers' clouds.
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes it easier because you get lower costs, you get lower latency for the engineers, which is really important. They get more visibility into what resources they're using, and then we can hook up to all of their internal shared resources from a data standpoint as well. So I think everybody just wins in that regard.
Got it. So you're almost like a package that you then install in their system that then
Yeah.
runs.
There's an agent that runs in their Kubernetes cluster, generates the dashboard that we actually have, gives them visibility and stuff.
Got it. Cool. I had no idea. I just assumed it was a SaaS offering and everybody's just piping everything into Sumeet's little home server that's sitting underneath his desk right now. I don't know.
That would be melting me right now. But no,
Costs.
yes, in summer. I think there's something to be said though about if you can deploy within your customer's cloud, it gives them that agency and that control. And I think that addresses a lot of those concerns you were talking about.
Mhm.
But with the SaaS offering that we had in the past, that concern definitely came up. What are you doing with our data? You see this with a lot of AI stuff happening right now too, right? Some people are over it where it's like, well, you're helping me write good code, so I'm not going to complain too much. But there are concerns around what happens if our source code leaks? What data are we actually sending over? Are you training on all this stuff? And you have all of these terms of service and privacy agreements and all that stuff. And I'm sure there'll be lawsuits about breaches of this in the future. But if you can circumvent that and then give people peace of mind of, we will help you manage this within your environment, you have full control.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. Also, from a resourcing standpoint, right? A lot of these large organizations have deals with major cloud providers. So they're going to get better hosting costs than we would get anyway. So why not just let them take advantage of that?
It also positions you nicely to sell to the largest of largest enterprises. Like imagine selling to the US, they're going to be piping stuff into your system. They want it on there. They want a box. They want a box that goes into their server. That's what they're going to want. Yeah.
And this goes back to positioning, right? Like we're enterprise first, not the smaller individual developers. So it makes sense to focus on that more.
Awesome. Wrapping up this segment here, we covered a lot of ground. We talked about Uber, we talked about chat apps, we talked about your application and lessons learned. I think, knowing that you were not in the room when the decision was made to create your own chat application, but let's assume you were the one making the decision. Would you have made it differently? And how would you have made the decision?
I think I would have, to be honest, because this might have been the wrong decision at the time, right? For how the company was operating, profitability was a big point. But looking back, right, we had HipChat before we had UChat, the internal chat application. And the biggest pain point that people were frustrated by and why we moved off of HipChat, to my knowledge, was reliability, right?
They had massive outages in that period of time. If anybody remembers, during the early 2010s, HipChat was having some like real scalability issues.
Yeah, this was in like 2015, 2016 at that point. So they got past that and they were getting a bit better, but even still, just lagginess, messages not sending, stuff like that just was a problem, especially in international markets. And I think for me, at the end of the day, I just have this philosophy of how do you get the most out of the people you have? How do you empower them? How do you give them the tools that just let them get shit done? Because that's why you hired them. And for me, it would have been this question of, okay, if we built something internally, it would save us this much money, but how confident are we that it would be more reliable than HipChat? And at least as reliable or close to as reliable as Slack.
Mm.
And if anything, I might have done a Slack pilot with some small groups and said, are people even talking about messaging anymore, or are they just focused on work? And if you can get those teams to validate that, yes, it just works, things are great, then I would have probably leaned into that. But then again, I didn't know how much it cost, so maybe it would have been a little bit too big of a bill.
Yeah.
The reality is, though, we ended up switching to Slack anyway.
Yeah. At the end of the day, everybody using Slack these days.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Sumeet, for that. Those are lots of very interesting stories there, especially around Uber. I didn't realize that they built their own chat application.
Yeah.
To wrap up our podcast, we always like to ask our hosts a couple of fun questions at the very end. And the first question I have for you is share something that you're excited about, either in your personal life or your work life, that you really want to just let the audience know.
I can give two very different answers about this.
I'll take them both.
From a technical standpoint, I think it's probably overplayed at this point, but I am actually very excited about what can happen with agents and AI in the future. I think right now everybody's focused on these conversational models, whether it's by text or voice, just look up information.
Mm-hmm.
But I play a lot of guitar, right? I have a lot of different hobbies on the side. And I think having a co-pilot help me figure out how to learn a specific song or figure things out is pretty great, to be totally honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really looking forward to a future where people are able to learn and improve and just get better at things they want to get better at easily without having to say, like, how do I work up the courage to ask somebody to help me out, or how to even find the right person to help me with this thing? Because I think we all learn better when we have support. So that's one thing I'm super excited about. On a personal level, we have two kids, as our youngest is now 2.5, and they're finally both manageable to the point where I can ask my parents to keep an eye on them for the weekend. So my wife and I can actually go for a weekend trip, which we haven't done in a very long time. So that's probably the thing I'm most excited about.
The models are finally getting to a point where they can be self-sufficient with less attention.
Not too painful for others is what it comes down to.
I think I was catching up with an old coworker that now works at OpenAI. I think when he joined OpenAI, he had his first child. And he always was joking about how it's a race between his child and OpenAI to train, see which one gets the like intelligence first, right?
I think OpenAI's got that one.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it's the humans don't, maybe, I don't know, do humans like learn at exponential scale? Maybe, I don't know.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. The second our oldest started reading, it was like very slow at first, and now it's been a couple months. Now he's just reading full books. So the rate of absorbing things is pretty fast, but there's degrees of exponential growth. I think the AI models probably have a speed.
Yeah, probably. I think back to your comment about agents, right? Once we start plugging these AI models into the real world and they can affect real world outcomes, I don't know. Our years are limited, Sumeet. What are we going to do?
I'm going to play with this 3D printer I got a month ago and just keep making random stuff for the home, like my cup holder.
Yeah.
It's good.
And cool. And the last question that we always ask here is a product that you've recently purchased and that you either loved or would never buy again. You just mentioned a 3D printer. We're gonna exclude that one, so you're gonna have to pick something new.
I love it though. I'll think of something else, but like the Bamboo A1 Mini is a fantastic printer. They say it's the Apple phone of 3D printers because it just works from your phone and everything too.
Okay.
Highly recommend. Prices did just go up recently because of macroeconomic things going on, but yeah,
I don't know.
Tariffs, yeah. Prices.
But are there tariffs or are there not tariffs? Who knows?
I don't know, man. It's Schrodinger's tariff, man. We'll find out what happens. What's another product I bought recently that I love? I don't buy a lot of things these days, to be honest. I think it's just the printer that has been destroying my mind for a while.
You bought anything for the kids? A book or something? I don't know.
They've been getting into Pokemon.
Oh.
So that's, yeah. I'm worried that I'm going to have to start buying Pokemon cards for them. My parents are selling our old house and they just brought all of my old Pokemon cards and my kids found them. And so it's this mixture of, oh, look, they found my child. And also, oh, wait, that card might be worth a few $1,000s. Please don't tear that.
Don't touch.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one thing. There are learning apps for kids. I was talking about teaching our oldest to read.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of learning apps that are out there to help kids learn more effectively, whether it's the number blocks videos for math or other things as well. And gamified learning sounds horrifying to say, but it's insane how quickly you can teach kids to learn something these days. And I'm actually really excited to see how all these different education tools are going to evolve and hopefully not be addictive, but just be a positive value add for how quickly people can learn things.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I'm sure I'll be coming to you for advice on child rearing. It's nice to have friends who are just like a couple steps ahead of you and you
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
like,
we can fall for you, so you know what to watch out for. It's great.
I will say you guys brought over that really adorable Michigan outfit, U of M outfit. And that was one of the first things we put my daughter in once we got that kind of like toddler sized outfit. So
Yeah,
uh,
you gotta brainwash them young, right? Always represent Michigan.
go blue.
Go blue.
Awesome. Well, Sumeet, it's been an absolute pleasure. Always love catching up with you, and say hi to the family for me. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. Say hi to everyone, and we'll catch up soon.
I will. Thank you for listening. If you found this show valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or here on YouTube. We'd love if you could leave us a rating and/or a review, as that helps others find this podcast. See you next time.